Yes, good evening, folks. Welcome back to the channel. As a Thursday night live streaming coming up tonight, we're going to talk about Celtic's return from the international break, the big games we've got coming up, the new signings, where and when are they going to fit in. We'll talk about Alistair Johnson's potential new contract as well, and we're also going to answer your questions both from Twitter and in the live chat box. So you have to be subscribed to ask a question. Subscribers only mode in the chat, so if you haven't already, subscribe below and you can ask a question and we'll answer any good ones as we go through. And Chris, we're also going to touch on Scottish football's new VAR review show. Will it lead to more transparency or just more intense scrutiny for referees? But first of all, I don't know what international breaks are like for you over there in Canada, Chris, but it's fair to say they drag on.
Yeah, it's torture. And look, and I was born in Rutherglen. I'm a very proud Scotland fan as much as I am a Celtic fan. But yeah, the break is certainly too long for me because I think as club football fans, no matter where you are in the world, your club is generally your biggest passion. Not always, but generally speaking. So yeah, I'm excited that we're going to be back in action and really looking forward to seeing how much of the new signings, which is definitely one of the topics you and I are going to discuss today along with our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking back to that derby just before the international break there, we started the season so well, you almost didn't want the break to come. The team are playing so well, 100% start to the season. Much better than this time last season. And what a way to cap that first section of the season with that win against Rangers, eh?
Yeah, it was an absolutely dominant performance. To be completely honest, the fallout on the other side of Glasgow has been quite epic to say the least, and has made for some excellent viewing. But we just need to continue to focus on ourselves. And to be honest, when you and I previewed the game, Paul, I said if we played the way we can, if we play with the focus and the intensity that Brendan has come to expect, we will win the game. I said 2-0. It finished 3-0. I've been extremely close with my predictions. I was confident we would win the game. And all this rhetoric about, if we'd just taken our 2 chances, both of those chances were offside. The goals wouldn't have counted. Our offside goal is the finest of margins. But that just that moment in the game, Rangers just completely folded mentally. And they knew they were in trouble because they knew what they were doing wasn't going to be sustainable, wasn't going to be effective. And after that, we really dominated the game. And I would just also want to call out that I said in the preview that Kyogo would score, and he did. I just had a feeling he was so due. The way he'd been playing just didn't justify the fact that he had no goals to start the season. So just so many great things, Paul, to be honest, coming out of that game. But most pleasing is the 100% start. We have not conceded a goal in the league yet, only one from all competitions. And that is a template for sustainable success in all of the domestic competitions.
Aye, absolutely. Let's hope that good form continues. So let's just quickly look again, in case you've forgotten about Celtic's next 6 games. Home against Hearts on Saturday, then Slovan Bratislava, then Falkirk in the League Cup, and then followed up by those 3 away games. St Johnstone in the league, the big one against Dortmund, away in the Champions League, and then we finish away against Ross County. That says Saturday. The game has actually been moved to Sunday since I made that graphic, but that will close out the next block of fixtures. And then, unfortunately, we'll have another international break to deal with at the start of October. But Chris, thinking back to that game against Rangers, we did see debuts off the bench for Arne Engels and Luke McCowan, both of whom I spoke to this week at their press conferences. Mm-hmm. The big question with Engels being the club's record signing is when and where is he going to fit into the team? Because with the price tag comes the expectation that he's going to be the main man and he's going to start a lot of games. That's what you'd expect. But he comes into a team that's playing so well and a midfield that's playing so well, despite having lost Matt O'Reilly. Paulo Bernardo's come in seamlessly, playing very, very well. So looking at those games, and thinking about dynamic in midfield just now, where do you think we're going to see Engels and when?
I think he'll start one of the next 2 domestic games. So he'll either start against Hearts this weekend, although the way Bernardo played, it would be completely unfair to take him out of the team. But when you pay £11 million for a player, your intention is that they'll go into the starting 11. So I suspect we might see him off the bench. But you could make an argument that if he starts the game against Hearts and plays well, you'd probably want him in your starting 11 in the Champions League game in the midweek. So it's a really interesting dynamic because Bernardo more than earned to keep his place, but I think you'd want to get Engels a full 90 minutes before he would play in a Champions League game if he was going to start. So that will be a very interesting development to watch with the team this weekend, Paul. I think Luke McCowan will probably play in the Falkirk game. And you may see Engels in that game as well, with Hatate and McGregor perhaps gets a rest. That to me would be the ideal scenario. I think a home game against Falkirk, with the greatest amount of respect, is a game where we should expect to see some rotation. And given that block of 6 fixtures, there's some tricky away ties to navigate domestically, sandwiched in between the league game and the next Champions League game after this week, which is obviously Dortmund away. So that's what I think will happen. I believe he'll start one of those 2 games. I would say if he starts against Hearts and plays well, I think he probably starts against Bratislava.
I just want to bring in a comment here. I think he'll start before Hatate on Saturday. That's something that I've seen people debating about, whether Hatate might be the one to drop out to accommodate Engels over Bernardo, because Bernardo has played well since he's come into the team. Where do you stand on that one? Rio Hatate's obviously been here a long time. He's actually started the season really well. He's got 2 goals. Do you think that's a possibility, that we might see Engels take Hatate's place more often than Bernardo's?
No, not personally for me. I mean, look, this is why we're football fans first and foremost. Put aside our allegiances to Celtic. Hatate at this moment in time is technically a far superior player than Bernardo. Has Bernardo started the season well? Absolutely. Couldn't disagree with that. Arguably, probably man of the match for how he played. Him or Alistair Johnston for me were man of the match against Rangers in the Derby game. But no, Hatate's ability to take the ball under pressure, to spin off his man, to see the pockets of space. He's fully healthy. He's fully fit. He is probably one of the first names on the team sheet for me. I just think he's such a fantastic footballer. And when he is fully fit and he's on his game, he 100% starts in that midfield. I think we've heard Brendan Rodgers talk about he expected more from him last year. And I do think his injuries were an impediment to being able to get a really good rhythm in the season, Paul. But we've already seen the best of him. I'm not saying he had a fantastic game against Rangers, but I just don't see him being taken out for Engels over Bernardo. I can't see that. I would love to be proved wrong, Paul, but I just can't see it.
See if we think about mentally that, let's go with the scenario that it is Bernardo that drops out, right? He's just come to the club on a permanent basis. He's replaced Matt O'Reilly since he left the club in these first 2 games. Played very well. We talked in the post-match content after the Rangers game about Paulo Bernardo thinking because Engels has come in the door, he had to go and perform against Rangers and prove that he can hold his own in that position. If we have a scenario where Bernardo is the player that drops out and Engels takes his place, do you think that's a hard one for Bernardo, in it? Because he's come in, O'Reilly leaving has given him his opportunity, and he has played well. But I mean, ultimately for us and ultimately for Brendan Rodgers, it's about competition, and he wants competition. He wants a lot of good players competing for few places. But if it is Bernardo that drops out, I just hope he can still see how he can push on and develop and get the game time that he needs at Celtic.
I actually think it's exactly what Brendan's been saying. I need quality I need quality in the starting 11 to improve. I think we did that. We needed to strengthen our bench. I think we did that. But I think the way we train and the competition for the places, particularly in that midfield, is doing exactly as we saw. Bernardo had arguably his best game in a Celtic jersey. I just think as a young player, it sounds like from interviews I've heard with Brendan Rodgers talking about Paulo Bernardo, is he's very impressed with his attitude for a young footballer, like his willingness to learn, understanding you may have to fight for your place. If you get your chance, you've got to take it. You could say he's done all of those things in a short sample size, Paul. And I agree with you. It would be really, really tough for that scenario to play out that you described. I just think because of that competition in there, whoever starts a game knows they've got to play really, really well, and they'll give themselves a chance the next game. That only benefits the team and the club and the product that we're going to see on the field.
Ultimately, that is what it's about. And I think this is where Brendan Rodgers earns his money, right? It's about keeping the team happy, keeping everybody happy. And I think when we go into these European games, I think having a strong bench is going to be really important for us. These games are going to be so difficult to navigate. We're going to need players to come on and change games for us, because they're not going to be easy. It's not going to be plain sailing the way it has been domestically so far in these European games. So we're going to need players off the bench, and that might be where they all share the load, they all share the minutes. Just thinking about Bernardo being a young player, and Brendan Rodgers has been really impressed with his professionalism, his attitude. Engels is actually younger than him. So that's another factor into the mix. It's going to be really interesting to see how that develops in midfield, Chris. And I think another area for us is centre half, where Austin Trusty's come in for £6 million. He was on the bench, I think, against Rangers. Obviously didn't make his debut off the bench. Liam Scales performed brilliantly on the day. Do you think, despite the fact he's come in for £6 million, that Austin Trusty's going to have to bide his time?
I know you might not like this opinion, Paul, because I know you have mixed feelings about Liam Scales. That's something we've talked about and some of our viewers, but how could you take him out of the team? I think for me, Paul, it's going to take, and we've had this debate, right? Are the small mistakes, can you look by them because he's Liam Scales, proud Irish, probably a huge Celtic fan, family Celtic, gives absolutely everything every time he plays. But there's an argument to be made that we'd like to see what we have in Austin Trusty, because if you're paying £6 million, I'd be making the same argument I made with Engels, is that you would expect him to play. So we're going to have to see him at some point. But I do think he's going to have to take that starting jersey away from Liam Scales. And I don't think that's being unfair or unrealistic. I think it's still Scales' spot. But if Trusty was to come in, say through, an injury or something like that, and he plays really, really well, then he's going to hold down the jersey. So it's the same argument we just had about the midfield you can make, is the competition for places is going to be huge. But I can't lie, I'd be really keen to see Carter Vickers and Trusty together. I think that could really, really be a dynamic center defense partnership. And then if Scales is fighting for his spot, say off the bench now, then you've got, again, that scenario where it's a healthy competition for places, and it's only good for the team and only good for the club.
Yeah, I think, again, coming back to Europe, my concern with Scales has always been just as on the ball, as passing. That's going to be tested more against the better teams when we come to European competition, where he might be left on the ball. He might be the trigger for the other team to press, and that's when his passing will come under scrutiny. There's no doubt he's defended really, really well, and actually defended brilliantly against Rangers. All of his aerial duels, some of his challenges, he just defended really strongly from start to finish. So there's no doubt that he's defending well. We'll see what happens with Trusty. We'll see when he comes into the team what he's like. We don't know that yet. We don't know what he's like on the ball. Is he going to be an upgrade in that department? We'll need to wait and see when he plays and he gets some minutes. But again, it's just good to have that competition. And if you look at the likes of Bernardo and Scales in that derby with those players there, on the bench, waiting for their opportunity. They have to perform now, and that comes back to the competition that we want to have throughout the squad. And lastly, just on the new signings, Chris, Alex Valle, we didn't see him against Rangers. What do you think his role is going to be this season? Do you think he's going to have a fair share of games to split with Greg Taylor? I think Brendan Rodgers might have alluded to playing him maybe even a wee bit more advanced, or that he can play a wee bit more advanced as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you see him just being backup, or do you think that because he's a lone player, we don't have an option? Do you think that might alter his game time in any way?
It's going to sound like we're literally repeating the same conversation, but Greg Taylor also had a fantastic game against Rangers, and after Ange came in, he really transformed Greg Taylor, I felt, into, with that inverted fullback role. And I think to Brendan Rodgers' credit, I think he recognized even in his own system that he was not getting the best out of the inverted fullback role, and therefore the wingers. Adding quality makes a huge difference. The renaissance of Nicholas Kuhn this year has been like we literally got a new signing. I think Valle will play probably selected home games where we're expected to win and he can come in. He will probably play against Falkirk in the League Cup game, would be my guess. And I would guess as well, if we're winning games comfortably by halftime, 60 minutes, then you might start to see him get rotations. If we can do so using the 5 substitutions, Paul. But if I was to put a number on how many games he might start, I don't know if it'll be more than 10, right? I mean, that's just thinking practically. But I would really like to see what we have in that player. I mean, it was interesting that Barcelona extended his contract by the 1 year, right? Because I suspect, although there isn't an option to buy, if he does well and he wants to stay, we do need permanent cover for Greg Taylor. And Greg Taylor is getting a little bit older now. I mean, is he 27, 28 years old? So,
and the final year of his contract.
And he's in the final year of his contract, right? So I think he is another player I'd like to see get tied down on a longer term contract. And I just think he's been a fantastic servant for the club. Really has.
Yeah, he is playing well just now. And I think really the takeaway from the discussion about all of the signings is we're probably not going to see exactly where and how much these new signings fit in until we start to hit a rocky patch, or we have more difficult games where the weaknesses in the team come under scrutiny. Maybe 1 or 2 players have a drop in form, and then the new players get their opportunity, and then we can assess it more. It's obviously so difficult to judge. We're just having a conversation here. It's so difficult to judge with new players because we haven't seen them really play any minutes yet for Celtic, but a lot to look forward to. I just want to touch on the last signing. We've not discussed in any detail, Chris, Luke McCowan. I don't know if you've seen the clip from my question with him on Tuesday, but Monday, sorry, it was brilliant because he spent the time at Ayr. He was only at Ayr 4 years ago, and he talked about his mate who chucked it, who gave it up because of the travel, and he couldn't hack the travel anymore. And Luke McCowan's persisted, got his move to Dundee, and here he is 4 or 5 years later, a Celtic player. I thought it was a brilliant message for young players.
Yeah, and just refreshing as well that he didn't give the media-trained, just generic answer. It was a very passionate, honest assessment of where he was a number of years ago to where he is now. My dad is a huge Dundee fan. I spoke to him yesterday, and he was very disconsolate that we've taken their best player. But I'm not saying this is going to happen, so please don't be all over me in the comments. But what I said to my dad was, imagine if he's another Andy Robertson. Imagine if he's another John McGinn, right? If that scenario was to play out and we paid £1 million, because you just never know what a player's ceiling is going to be with the right type of coaching, with the right type of development, with the right type of mentorship. Who knows what Luke McCowan could turn out to be? But I'm just really excited to see what happens. I mean, he's 23 or 24 years old, so he's been battling his whole professional career, and here he is. He's a Celtic player. And again, if you think about of all the players that we signed, Paul, he's probably the most motivated right now to try and get himself into the team, whether that's coming off the bench, or being able to fight for that starting spot amongst all those quality players. So you just never know what a player's going to turn out. And I'm not saying he will turn out to be a Robertson or a John McGinn, but you just never know. And that's the beauty of football, right? Players can just develop. And agree with the comment there from Mark Nugent. It says very likable. That's what I really enjoyed about his interview. Just very likable. Clearly a massive Celtic fan, as is his family. And as supporters, we tend to have an even greater soft spot for those types of players.
Aye, absolutely. I just wanted, before we move on, bring in a comment for Liam Devine. The issue with Greg Taylor is that Brendan Rodgers, what does he say, needs for the Champions League pace and power. Taylor's slow and small, but his attitude and application in domestic games is genuinely elite level. It's a tough one. I think that sums it up pretty well. When we come to the bigger games, we might see the sort of athleticism and the size of Greg Taylor exploited by these bigger teams, but I think domestically he's been absolutely brilliant, and I love what he brings to the team. I love his attitude. I love his approach to the game. And he is playing very well just now, so it will come down to form and fitness. And when we face these bigger tests, we'll see how we go. Moving on, Chris, to another Canadian, Alistair Johnston. He actually picked up an injury, which I'm sure we'll hear about tomorrow from Brendan Rodgers if he's going to be fit for Saturday. But news last night that the club have opened talks with his representatives to give him a new contract and bring him in line with the highest earners at the club. Do you think that's the right thing to do and a worthy reward?
It's the definition of an absolute no-brainer, Paul. I mean, he outside of his injury, which clearly hampered him for a good period of his second season, when he has been fully fit, and I think he was fantastic under Ange, but I just feel like the system Rodgers particularly is playing now has really benefited Alistair Johnston, and he's risen to the task. I mean, obviously, being a Scotsman living in Canada, I get good exposure to the Canadian national team. I mean, he was absolutely outstanding for Canada in the Copa America. He played every minute of every game. And as we've talked about in our Celtic Fans TV group chat, probably the number of minutes is what led to the tight hamstring. But the good thing was they just took him off, said it was precautionary. And if he's out for a week to 10 days and then gets back into training, I'm fine with Ralston playing this weekend against Hearts. I wouldn't risk it. If he's going to be fit, I'd rather he's fit for the Champions League game on Wednesday night. That's the one that we would all really prefer to see him in. In terms of the contract, like I said, no brainer. Love him. He is the type of player Celtic fans absolutely love. Work ethic off the scales. Speaks really well in the media. He's got pretty good power for a Canadian, and just gives his absolute all for the name on the front versus the name on the back, and that's what we can get right behind. And he's just been a fantastic signing, and he would fully deserve that new contract and a pay rise for me.
I don't know if you've seen he was on a couple of Canadian podcasts during this international break, and there was a great section when they were asking him about Celtic and what being at Celtic is like, and he just strikes me as somebody that's absolutely cut out to play for Celtic. I think he relishes the pressure. I know he made some comments about adapting to being in the Goldfish Bowl and everybody knowing him. He had a great line about a grandma, as he called her, tapping him on the shoulder to say that he didn't play well at the weekend and how he had to adjust to that. But I think the way he enjoys the intensity, I think you can see that in the games, but not just in terms of the intensity he plays with physically, but you can tell he loves the mental demands of it as well. And you could tell that from minute one. His debut was at Ibrox, and he just took to it like a duck to water, really. I love him. I think he's brilliant. I think he's got the sort of stature and the demeanour you're looking for to be a Celtic player. And I think it's the right thing to do to offer him a new contract. He's still got, I think it's 3 years to run. Again, he's like in that sort of mid-20s range. So it's either tie him down for his peak years, or if his form continues, you want to have a strong negotiating position if somebody's going to try and come and try and take him away. Just to round us off, Chris, you wanted to touch briefly. Somebody's asked, what would you score the transfer window out of 10? Me and Callum did a whole video on this, by the way, which you can see. So I don't want to get into it in too much detail, but we'll let Chris score it and point out any of his thoughts on the recruitment.
So out of 10, I'd give the window, it's either an 8 or an 8.5. I'm more leaning towards an 8 out of 10. Got rid of some players that needed to go out and just play football elsewhere. You know, I won't call them deadwood because I'm not about being like, you know, disrespectful to our own players, but that to me was a significant thing that needed to happen. So I was really pleased. I think we strengthened in all of the positions. If you were being greedy, could we have maybe had one more winger or one more striker? I mean, with Kyogo and Ida, and then you've got Maida as someone else that can play through the striker role very effectively. For me, we signed all the right players. The thing I'd actually give the club the most credit for is actually signing Sinisalo after, like, along with Schmeichel. I think that's really was a smart move. It's a young goalkeeper that could really blossom. Schmeichel's ability with the ball will really help us in the Champions League, particularly playing through the counter press. So I'm really keen to see him. And just his attitude in that moment, right at the end against McCowan, just the way he came out, that's an absolute trademark Schmeichel save, whether it's him or his father. Like, that is what you have come to expect. What really doesn't allow me to give a higher mark than 8 is the process. The process in which the club went through to leave it to the last 48 hours or 24 hours to get all these deals done, and probably overpaid by 3 or 4 million collectively, but yet we still came out with a current surplus of about 6.5 or 7 million pounds. The club did great business. If you, in the context of the model that we know they have to operate in, they did really good business. We broke the record signing twice consecutively. First with Ida, then with Engels. And because of the resurgence of Nicholas Kuhn, like, it's just that the team is in a really, really good place. So I just would like to see the club do a better job, and it smacks of needing a head of recruitment. Like, that is a role the club have to make and have to fill. And I would say that the hiring of that role would be heavily directed by Brendan Rodgers, meaning he knows the type of person he's going to work with, because whoever that head of recruitment is bringing the players in front of the manager, in front of the management team to say, based on how you want to play, look at this player. We know the model. It's young players between 19 and generally 24 that can come in and do a fantastic job for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then we're going to sell them on. And that's how we have been able to survive. If we want to go further in Europe, though, the club is going to have to go beyond that model and that level of ambition from time to time. We're in a situation right now, Paul, where we could absolutely bury Rangers for the next 5 to 7 years in terms of our domestic dominance. If Brendan Rodgers stays beyond his 3-year contract, which, you know, next year, that's going to be a big talking point, right? You'd hope the club would try to offer him an extension of maybe another 2 years so you know what you've got. But it's going to have to come with the improved transfer process, the funds continuing to be made available, and showing some ambition beyond just domestic dominance. We have, I said it during the live stream, that was an opportunity draw for the Champions League. So starting on Wednesday night, it's got to be 3 points. I don't care how we get the 3 points, Paul, but it's got to be 3 points because the next few games are extremely tough. But let's show some ambition. Let's open up the checkbook beyond having a net surplus. Let's actually run a bit of a deficit, given we had 70 million pounds and we're going to have another 40 coming in for the Champions League. Let's push the envelope. Let's sign a 15 million pound player. Why not?
I just want to pick up on something you said there about Brendan Rodgers being involved and bringing in a new head of recruitment. I think there's a strong argument to say the manager shouldn't be directly involved in that, but that's in an ideal world. In Celtic's world, Brendan Rodgers is probably the person with the most football-specific expertise in the building. I think that's he actually alluded to that himself, where he was talking about being a football person and the successful business people that are on the board at Celtic. So I think, yes, ideally the manager wouldn't be involved, because the manager can change. Anything can happen when a manager moves on. So if the manager's too involved in bringing in a head of recruitment, you bring in the next manager and they can't work together. It's got to be, I think, the club that sets the direction in terms of the model. The model's there, but in terms of going finding the right head of recruitment, I think it's their responsibility to do that. Talking about the money the club has, the funds that we've got at the minute, the accounts are going to be released in about a week's time. So we'll see the full extent of the cash at bank up until the 30th of June there. I think they are doing some sort of facelift work on the stadium. We know there's tunnel upgrades happening. They're even painting the steel structure of the stadium, I've noticed when I've been up at the press conferences recently. So they're starting to do some small things. We know that Barrowfield was a big infrastructure investment, but I think with the amount of money the club has, and again, coming back to the transfer window, in terms of making a net profit again on trading because of the Matt O'Reilly sale and getting a bit of getting good fees for a lot of the fringe players, we've made a profit despite the fact we've spent some big money. The financial position, the overall financial position, is still going to be very strong. So I think there's more infrastructure work the club can do because they've got to put those funds to work. There's no point in it sitting in the bank and then being paid to the taxman and corporation tax at the end of every season, because that's an inefficient use of the success the club has had, whether it be through Champions League qualification or the player trading model. So moving on then to the Champions League, as you just mentioned, Chris, we know Wednesday's game is massive. We're going to be previewing Slovan Bratislava with a Slovakian guest on Monday, hopefully. So stay tuned for that. We'll have more on them, but we know it's a huge game for us. We have to get off to a winning start. But how many points do you think we can get realistically from this group, and is it enough for us? Do you think it will be enough for us to make that playoff position?
So I think if I read correctly, and it may have been in our group chat, that some of the simulations that are being run is that 12 points might actually be needed. So
I just want to bring this up quickly, Chris. So this is from Football Ranking on Twitter. I don't know if you guys can see it very well, but that is the sort of system that projected Celtic on just below 10 points actually, and hanging on to 24th spot there. Now, who knows the number of metrics that they use to put these things together? I know Opta came up with data that showed that we had technically the easiest draw in the competition, but if you can see that there, Celtic are in 24th spot, just below 10 points. I think we've had a couple of Football Manager comments. I know Liam is in the comments now, saying big FM player here, 10 points almost guarantees it, 11 points absolutely guarantees it. We had a comment last week of someone who simulated the group stage, the league stage, 10 times on Football Manager, and suggested that 12 points is what would be needed. So I'll let you continue, Chris, on how many you think we can get.
I mean, I think a very realistic number is definitely 10 points, right? I think that's a very realistic number. Whether that gets you in that 24 or just above will probably depend on other results. And I think what we're going to see in this Champions League, and in particular the new format, is there's going to be some unbelievably surprising results just based on you don't always have easy games now depending on your draw. Celtic for sure got a favorable draw. Somebody just said in the comments, and I totally agree, is that we need to have a surprising result away from home. Like that's what it's really going to be. I mean, with the greatest amount of respect, if we could take 6 points from Slovan Bratislava, I like our chances to try and get another 6 points somewhere else across the remaining 6 games. So depending on how you look,
we can only take 3 from
Bratislava. Sorry, apologies. Was about to correct myself. We can only take 3 points because of the way the new format's 8 unique games. Sorry, I did know that. So, it's going to have to be a surprising result somewhere, Paul, right? Maybe it's taking a point in Dortmund. Maybe it's beating RB. Everyone thinks we should be winning all of our home games, but it's not automatic that that's going to happen. Imagine if we're going to Villa, though, needing a point or needing 3 points. Like, that's just going to make for a spectacle in terms of the 8th and final game. So yeah, it's really going to be. See how used I am to the old Champions League format. I caught myself with the playing the same team twice. But yeah, I think 10 is very realistic, Paul. If we get 11 or 12, I feel really, really good that we're giving ourselves a chance to play knockout football again, which would be really nice. Winning a knockout tie, because if you finish 14th, you're playing a team that finished, or 24th, sorry, you're probably playing the team that finishes 9th, which would be likely a very, very, very good side.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait for it. I just want to flag Chris Fraser's comment saying that we'll get 13 points. I love that optimism. But I think right now I would take 10 and take our chances. So moving on then, Chris, Scottish football has introduced this season, it would appear, VAR review shows. We had Willie Collum. I think he was on the radio last night as well, wasn't he? But he was also on.
Yeah, he was on.
Super Scoreboard, yeah.
Super Scoreboard, thank you. Yeah.
He was also on with Gordon Duncan on William Hill's new SPFL weekly show. So do you think, I mean, I don't know how much you've seen of it. I watched the whole video this morning. Do you think this is a good step forward in terms of transparency on one hand, but ultimately is it going to lead to more scrutiny because it's going to show up? Yes, we're going to get more transparency and more understanding of the VAR process, which I think is a good thing for all football supporters in any country across the board, because it is a new technology and football fans of all ages don't have a full understanding of it. It is quite a complex thing. So that's good on one hand, but the scrutiny that comes from listening to the audio that leads to some of these decisions is only going to increase, in my opinion.
So the most egregious one is Kyogo not being awarded a penalty. And what really disturbed me about that was how quickly it was dismissed. It's less than 20 seconds, maybe 15 seconds maximum. I think he's just made himself big.
And not moved.
He turned his whole body, the goalkeeper, into Kyogo, clearly taking him out. It's a penalty every day of the week, and I would say that if that was another team, like it's not our green tinted glasses, like that is a penalty. And how quickly it was dismissed was really disturbing. I will say, I think the step to making that available is a really good step forward, Paul, in terms of transparency. And I do agree with you that it is going to bring much more scrutiny, but you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? So if we're all asking for more transparency, then we're going to have to deal with what we hear in addition to what we've seen. So I think we just have to understand that that's the way this is going to work. Where football is still sorely lacking is we're so far behind rugby, as an example. In rugby, you physically hear the conversation between the TMO and the referee on the field. That's the ultimate transparency. What's the incident? What's the discussion? What's the decision? That's where we ultimately need to get to, right? Is being able to hear in real time the discussion. Well, because now my argument is, Paul, if you're making this information available, why not go one step further and just make it available in real time? I understand there'd be some technological things we'd have to work through to be able to do that, but that's the ultimate transparency.
I think it's early in that, isn't it? Just to come in on that one, I think it's early in that. I think they have trialled that in some competitions. Am I right? There was a quite high-profile competition. I can't remember what it was where they
I do believe you're right. It was.
But again, you think about England have been doing this show, I think, from at least the start of last season with Howard Webb. So again, you'd expect Scottish football to be behind, as it usually is. So I think something like that is a long way off. Right now, I think that would take a hell of a lot of getting used to for me to be able to hear. That I know in the stadium, certainly it would be very strange to be able to hear the referee speaking through a microphone. But there's lots of changes they can make to it. I just want to pick up on talking about the Kyogo one, which you did there. The thing that, I mean, Willie Collum says it was incorrect. It was a penalty. I don't think you needed very long at all to see that was a penalty. And I don't think you needed 2 and 3 angle. I think immediately you could tell from watching that back. I accept the referee's position is difficult because Matt O'Reilly's chipped the ball over the wall, and he maybe doesn't get a clear sight of it. But ultimately, one viewing back of that, you think, well, McCrory's gone right through Kyogo there. It's got to be a penalty kick. So the point on that is, well, we've coached the referees on how to get to the right decision there. I don't understand that. If a referee can't watch that situation and see immediately that it's a penalty, I don't know what other coaching you can give them that tells them when a goalkeeper comes out and absolutely wipes out the standing leg of a player who's touched the ball by him, it's a penalty. What more coaching is required in that circumstance?
There shouldn't be any, to be honest, Paul, right? And just the fact that they didn't let Don Robertson go to the monitor, to your point, if he doesn't see based on the position of the wall and O'Reilly playing it over, the VAR room has all the angles. And the way you described it is perfect. Takes the leg, takes the body, it's a penalty. Let him go to the monitor and make that decision. So look, I'm in favor of the increased transparency, and I'll live with the scrutiny that comes from it, Paul, to be honest. I do think it is a really positive step in the right direction. It would just be nice if it could be in front of these things rather than behind, like you say, using England as the example. Have been doing it now, they're in their second year. But it is certainly a step in the right direction, just given the number of really high profile decisions that were made or not made last season, particularly with the handballs, which I think so far we haven't heard anything ultra controversial with that yet. So we'll see how that plays out, Paul, over the course of the season with the change in the interpretation. But I think that plus the transparency, that's a couple of really good steps. And I hope in the future it is like rugby. And don't get me wrong, they still make wrong decisions as well. But at least everyone knows exactly in the moment what was seen, what was discussed, and the decision. Whether we agree with it or not, there's always going to be debate. But that's the truest sense of transparency for me as a football fan.
Yeah. Before we round up, another opportunity for you to ask your questions, and we'll try and pick a couple out before we round off. One question that was asked at the start, Chris, which I suppose we can run through now. What is your strongest starting 11? Is it right now that team that played against Rangers, given the form we've been in, or would you make any changes to that?
You see, I'm probably about to contradict myself, Paul. This is the joy of being put on the spot. But if you were to put form aside, I'm going to answer the question by putting form aside.
Okay.
Right? And also with the caveat that we have not seen Trusty play. We have not seen Engels play any sustained time yet. But based on the money invested and what we think we're receiving in those players, Trusty starts over Scales, Engels is in over Bernardo, and yes, the rest of the team is as is. That's my honest. I'm putting form aside, right? Because the jersey needs to be earned. But that for me, I would say on paper, how it plays out, we would have to see. But on paper, that would be the strongest 11.
Yeah. I agree. I think if you're looking at it on paper, if Engels and Trusty are going to perform to the level of investment in them, whatever that looks like, I think that is what you would presume might be the sort of most solid starting 11 going forward. But as I say, we've got so much to go before we see that. Lots of big games coming up, lots of challenging games where we might see some weaknesses exploited, we might have fitness concerns, injuries, dips in form for players, and that's when we'll see the depth that we've got and whether everybody can come in and really step up. The last one is Carter Vickers fit for Saturday? I believe he will be. I think my concern, obviously going into the Rangers game, Carter Vickers was taken out of the open training session, and Brendan Rodgers said, no, we sometimes just do that if we think somebody's maybe close to overtraining or things like that. We bring them in and we don't let them take part in that section of training. I think he looked a wee bit here and there against Rangers, a wee bit gingerly. I know he performed very well, but it was just watched him a couple of times and I thought maybe he has got something that's just bubbling beneath the surface there. So hopefully he's fine because he's such a massive player for us. We'll finish on John's question about your favourite summer signing. Again, comes with a caveat that we've not seen very many of them play yet. I would give a special mention to Luke McCowan because I've loved everything that I've seen from him since he arrived in terms of how buzzing he is to be here, what a humble, normal boy he is. But it's got to be Engels because I think to get a 20-year-old now full Belgian internationalist from a Bundesliga club for £11 million is the type of signing we've been crying out for decades. So if it's successful and if we can follow it up more consistently, that's the direction the club should go in. I really hope he is exactly what we need him to be. And if that means in 2 seasons we're going to sell him for 25 or 30 million, that's fine as long as we can find the next Engels in behind him. Chris, who's your favourite summer signing?
I was tempted to say Engels, but I just love Kasper Schmeichel. Like, he's a proper goalkeeper. He's a proper goalkeeper, man. I mean, Joe Hart left a significant void in terms of the leadership, right? So just when we signed him, the age was not a factor for me because as much as, yes, there's wear and tear on a goalkeeper's body, they are able to play very long and at the highest level. Gigi Buffon is the perfect example of that, right? Still playing an incredibly elite level into his 40s. That was the type of goalkeeper this team needed for Champions League football. Let's see how it plays out, but that to me was my favorite signing. But I wholeheartedly agree with you on Engels in terms of that's the echelon the club needs to play in when we are looking to make significant improvements to the team, not the squad, but the team. You are now in a 10 to 15 million pound bracket. That's where we need to operate. Not all the time. I get that. But that is where, and I give the club and I give the board massive credit because to your point, signing a 20-year-old player from the Bundesliga for that kind of money is for the first time since we spent over 24 million pounds under Martin O'Neill, a massive signal of intent. And look what that did for us in Europe. The quality of players we had based on the money we spent, Hartson, Sutton, Thompson, Lennon, Valhaden, Mialbi. And there was also some fantastic bargain deals in there, by the way. Didier Gat being the perfect example of an unbelievably dynamic winger. It can be done. And I saw a comment in there. Just my final thought, Paul, is one of our viewers said teams used to fear coming to Celtic Park. That's where we need to get back to at home. Whether this team can do that remains to be seen, but the board and the club took a big step in the right direction for me with the window process aside. So I'm excited to see if we can make it a cauldron again.
Yeah, brilliant. So I can't wait for it. That's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't already, please like the live stream. Help us reach as wide an audience as possible. And I'll be back tomorrow with the starting 11 prediction for Saturday's game against Hearts. Thank you.